All right, we're live here in Flatiron South, episode 7 GRC. We have a very special guest today, Rand Fishkin. Rand Fishkin, aka the Wizard of Moz, is co-founder and former CEO of Moz, host of Whiteboard Friday, co-author of a pair of books on SEO, co-founder of inbound.org, and just launched his second company, SparkToro. This, Lost and Founder, is his first solo book, and we have him on the show here to talk all about it. Welcome, Rand.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be here.
Great. How's your experience in New York been so far?
Well, I was mentioning my wife last night. We got back to our hotel room, and she said, "Hey, after this next company, how about we move to New York?" Wow. so good so far.
And your wife's here with you in New York and experiencing.
She is. Yeah. So she's also a published author.
Awesome.
And so she's meeting with her, editor and her agent and talking about her next book, and had some meetings. Was that Wednesday night in the city? Yeah.
Big book week, huh?
Big book week.
A lot of books. So this is your first solo book, but you've done other books, right? This is not the first time you've authored or worked on a book before. What were some of those other books that you worked on, and what were those books about? What was your experience with those books before we jump into this current book, Lost and Founder? Yeah,
so Art of SEO and Inbound Marketing and SEO were both very, they were drier, they were technical, they're specifically about the field of search engine optimization, and completely different experience. I mean, that was basically write some material about how some particular marketing system in Google works, send it to an editor, and they put it all together.
It's like industry text, right?
Yeah, industry text. It was like, honestly, it was like writing a guest blog post. Yeah. This experience was extraordinarily different. It felt like the classic writer experience, like you're in a Woody Allen movie from the 1970s. Sure. Where you're having late night calls with your editor, and there's the pressure of deadlines, and you feel like you're at a typewriter banging it out. It was cool.
Yeah. How did the whole process come to fruition? When did you go, I want to write a book, or did someone approach you asking? How did it work?
Yeah, so a few years ago at Moz, I was feeling a little bit like I had spare bandwidth. Which is unusual for me and makes me deeply uncomfortable.
The board CEO, you don't I feel like there's not a lot of spare bandwidth floating around when you're running a company.
Right? Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so 2 years after I stepped down as CEO, I kind of had this okay, I'm getting antsy, and I think I had lost a little bit of trust and sort of social capital inside the company, and so wasn't being given as much responsibility and oversight over projects that I might have liked to run. And so basically I had, a lot of marketing stuff I was doing, content contributions and Whiteboard Friday. I had one project, which was Keyword Explorer, that I got to work on still. But I said, hey, I want to do something else that will help the company, that will, expand our profile. What about a book? A book, I don't need to bug any engineers. Right, I don't need design help.
There's no beta for. I guess there is a beta for a book, but there's not as long as a roadmap to get it.
Well, I definitely didn't need anyone else at Moz's permission to do it. Right, so I talked to our CEO. I talked to the board of directors. Basically said, hey, I'm thinking about pitching a book. They said, great idea. So I went out and found an agent who was connected to me by Eric Rees, who wrote The Lean Startup, and he and I have had sort of a camaraderie for years. And Eric introduced me to his agent, or his agency, who said they'd be happy to represent me. And then I came to New York. Actually, I mentioned that Geraldine, my wife, is also an author, so she had found an agent just about the same time. So we came to New York the same week. That was January of 2016, and we both pitched, publishers, went to their offices and had conversations about that book. And both got book deals the next week.
Wow.
That was kind of crazy.
Power couple.
I guess so. I don't think that's very common, but it was a fun experience. And then, basically wrote a rough draft over the next 4 or 5 months. Had a call with my editor where she told me, this is not the right book.
Hard call.
Yeah, and so we threw that out. And then over the next 6 months, I wrote the rough draft that became what is Lost and Founder today.
And so it was about a 4-month process to get to that rough draft. What was that 4 months like? Was it what you think of when you think of a writer, late night, isolation, cups of coffee at 2 a.m., cranking it out? Or was it more like easy for you to just kind of pour out of you? What was that writing experience like to get to that first draft?
Sure. So, I mean, one of my big pieces of advice for other writers is that if you can blog first, writing becomes second nature. And one of the things that I did, in starting Moz was, Moz, for those of you who might not know, it used to be called SEO Moz, and it was seomoz.org. And I was the only blogger for about 5 years. And I would blog every night, Sunday to Thursday nights, and would find comments the next morning after I'd published. And so I had this experience of writing regularly, and consistently. So I think that helped a ton, and I would urge other writers to be able to do that.
And the blog for you came even before the business, right? The blog and the content. I thought, we don't have to jump into the book just yet because I do want to dig into a little bit more just how you got to the point of even doing the blog and sort of your story leading up to that. But it sounds like you were sort of a thought leader within the SEO space before you even really started a business, right? You're doing the blog and doing the tactical writing for the industry. Is that right? Or
a little bit, yeah. I would say that we were a consulting business before we were a software business, and when I started out on the blog, I mean, you can go back all the way in the archives and read these blog posts from 2003, 2004.
Back before you were the writer you are today.
Oh my God, it is deeply, deeply embarrassing, right? Yeah. It's just terrible stuff like, oh, I read this thing from this guy last night and it was interesting. You should also read it. That's not a blog post.
Like
what are you doing?
A diary entry.
Yeah, exactly. And this, I think that also makes you a better writer, right? I think that's one of the things that a publisher probably looks at. They see, oh, this person has become, a high quality writer. They've put out good stuff. They've built an audience. But yeah, so it took a good number of years before I think anyone would have called me a thought leader in the SEO or web marketing space. Probably at least 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And that was okay. So it took some time before you got to that thought leadership position.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, do you want to just, for the people who haven't read the book yet, the book's pretty new, right? Just came out. So, do you want to just tell the people a little bit about your story leading up to starting Moz? Then we can kind of dig into the creation of Moz and the company and sort of where you came from, your background, what led you to up into the point of becoming CEO of Moz.
Sure. Yeah. So I dropped out of college in 2001. And started building websites for a business that my mom had been running. My mom, Jillian, had been running for 20 years. And her business was basically, business card design, letterhead, logo, small business marketing packages.
Very, very local though, right?
Yeah, very local in the Seattle area. I think she had a few clients outside of Seattle, but, it was, a few $100s to a few $1,000s for these little marketing packages. And, her clients started needing websites, right? It's 2001, the internet's taking off a little bit. Some people are getting broadband finally at home, and it was dial-up, right? 90s were all dial-up. So, long story short, we were not very good at that. We had a lot of clients who didn't pay. We had a lot of jobs that we lost, and we went deeply into debt. And so, starting in around probably by end of 2002, 2003. We couldn't pay some of our subcontractors, including the folks who were doing SEO, like helping. At the time, Google wasn't the only search engine. There were all these other search engines. And so they were helping all of our clients' websites be found on these search engines. And so I had to learn the practice myself because we had promised our clients we'd do this work. We'd signed agreements with them, and then we couldn't afford to pay these people we were subcontracting to. So I dove into the world of SEO and started spending a lot of time in the forums, started this blog called SEO Moz, and then it was probably a couple years later, we started getting more business through the blog for SEO work than what we were getting on the web design side and on the broad marketing side. And so we basically shut down that business and made SEO Moz the primary business. And then in 2007, we did this weird thing. So we basically we were nearly paid off our debt at this point. It was $500,000 of debt, right? Like I think the book opens with debt collectors knocking on my door. And that was a stressful, shitty time.
Right, I can imagine.
But glad to be through that. The next 2 years later, Matt Inman was our developer, right? So it was basically the three of us, me, my mom, and this guy Matt.
In the movie theater, above the movie
theater,
a lot
right?
of popcorn scents.
Yeah. So Matt Inman, actually, you might know him. He runs this web comic called The Oatmeal now.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Love the oatmeal.
So for like 5 years, Matt and I worked together on building this. So Matt had basically built a few tools that we were using to do SEO consulting just for us. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Matt, I really want to share this with all of our blog readers and stuff. And he's like, no, dude, we don't have the bandwidth. Like, it'll cost us all this money if you open it up. So I said, well, wait, what if we put a paywall? Like, put a paywall in front of the tools. Mm-hmm. He's like, all right, yeah, I can set up like a little PayPal thing. So the deal was in February 2007, we launched this product. We had no idea what we were doing. We didn't even know what software as a service was. Mm-hmm. But
Salesforce was like really the only software as a service, or there were some software as a service companies, but correct me if I'm wrong, in 2007, Salesforce was really the only household name that was running that sort of business model.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, maybe like SurveyMonkey and a couple others, but we were just, we were totally blind. Like, I didn't know what venture capital was. I didn't really understand any of this stuff. But I did understand that the PayPal subscriptions within, I think it was 4 or 5 months, started to rival our consulting revenue, right? So we launched these tools behind a paywall, and suddenly it just took off, right? It was like a few people signing up every day, and then a couple dozen, and oh wow, there's like 500 people signed up to this thing. This is kind of crazy.
So at what point what was the process behind taking a step back and saying, like, wait a second, do we become a tech company here? I mean, you said at this point you didn't even know what venture capital is, and just on the timeline of the book, it goes pretty quick from should we become a startup kind of company to we're getting funded.
Yeah, well, and that is because simultaneously in the summer of 2007, after this software product started taking off, we got some inbound interest from 2 investors in Seattle. One was Ignition Partners, that was Michelle Goldberg, and the other one was a small private firm called Curious Office that did some investing. And both of them basically said, hey, we think what you're doing is exciting and interesting. I had a couple lunch and coffee meetings with them, and I had this big dream. I wanted to build the back end of Google. Mm-hmm. I was like, hey, what if we could build our own link index and then calculate our own versions of PageRank and then make that data accessible to the SEO world, right? Like that's, that would let people see behind the inner workings of Google. And for those of you who, don't know the history, it used to be the case that if you wanted to see all the pages and sites on the web that linked to you or to anyone else, you could go to Google and you could type link:@GramercyReadingClub.com, and you would get a list of all the links that pointed to you, which was awesome.
So any website that put Gramercy Reading Club's website on their website, we would see that.
Yeah, anyone who puts a little HTML link to you, right, that you can click and get to your site, you could see that through Google. In 2006, they took it away. They basically said, we think SEOs and spammers, we think they're gaming the system by looking at all these links, and we're removing this ability. And I was like, we got to bring that back. How do we bring that back? So these investors reach out, we have a bunch of conversations, and I said, all right, I think this is the path that I want to pursue. And then, basically conversations got more advanced, and in November, they put in $1.1 million, so $1 million from Ignition and $100,000 from Curious Office. They basically combined. They had a phone call together, and we're like, yeah, let's work together on this.
So you've had some good nights here. I mean, you have you and your wife getting book deals the same week, and 1.1. So what do you do the night you get 1.1 million in initial funding?
Okay, so this is actually a funny story. I don't think this is in the book, but my salary. Right, my salary had been, maybe like $14,000 a year for a few years there. Right, it was pretty rough.
Lean.
Super lean. I mean, Geraldine, my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, but she was paying the rent and all our bills, and I was like, I can buy a bottle of wine here and there, that kind of thing. But the day we got funding, my salary went to, I think it was like $122,000 a year.
Woo!
Which, I freaked out. I was losing my mind. I was like, oh my God, I'm like this kid in my 20s and I'm making six figures. Like, holy crap, what's going on? This is crazy. So I walk from, I don't have a car, so I didn't and still don't. So I walk from our offices a long ass way to this cooking supply store in Seattle. I think it's called Mrs. Cook's. And I bought a fancy Le Creuset pan, like like one of these silver heavy ones, right. And it's copper on the bottom, and like it, just makes beautiful sheen when you cook meat in it. And
some people might go out cop that new whip, might go out and cop some new gear for the squad.
Yeah,
let me go get that new deluxe Le Creuset pan so I can sear some scallops. That's that VC life, right? Or startup life.
Exactly. I mean, what's fun? I still have that pan, right? Every time I pull it out,
I'm
think
sure it's
about
an amazing pan.
Yeah, it's lasted a long time. Yeah. But yeah, I think that it's those kinds of stories that really stick with you. So the tough part was right before that, I had to have a hard, nasty and long conversation with my mom about her basically stepping aside and me taking the CEO role, because the investors said, look, we're interested in this company, but we want you as CEO.
And initially when they first funded you guys, they were investing in you and your mother as a partnership, right?
Yeah, I mean, my mom and I were co-founders, right? We each owned 50% of this CEO of Moz business.
Got it.
And so this was investors are coming in, but they wanted to see me in the CEO role. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a tough conversation because my mom, had been running this business for 26 years. We'd finally gotten out of debt, and it was just hard to be.
It's a tough conversation.
Yeah, really hard conversation.
All right, question for myself and for the listeners that may not know before we dive deeper into the business and the story of Moz. What is SEO? Can you explain SEO?
Oh, sure.
Like I'm 5 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you go to Google and you search for something, two kinds of results will show up. One kind of result are results that you can pay for to be in. They're the ads, right? And they'll say in very, very small gray text that they hope you don't notice. They'll say ad on them, but most people do notice. And in fact, overall, I think for every 15 clicks on the non-paid results, there's one click on the paid results. So, Google's doing fine. I mean, they're making their $70 billion a year off these paid ads, right? But the rest of the results are organic of one kind or another. All sorts of stuff will show up in there. Images will show up, links to other websites will show up, news, top stories results will show up, Twitter accounts show up, all sorts of things, right, that show up in those results. And SEO is the process of influencing and controlling and optimizing what appears in those non-paid results.
Understood. So what is there SEO for Bing?
Yeah, absolutely. There's SEO for Bing, there's SEO for Amazon, there's SEO for Etsy stores, right?
Okay, so literally anywhere that you're querying data and searching for something, you can do X, Y, and Z to achieve a higher position on those results.
Yeah, or optimize the position that you're already in to hopefully draw more clicks.
So a question I've always had about SEO is, I guess the use case for it is obvious. You want your page to get more hits. Is there any practice? Have you ever done any work that's kind of the opposite of that? I imagine there's a lot of people that don't want to be found, that work hard to not be found.
Yeah, and so this is really interesting on the from a government perspective, right?
Exactly.
So in Europe, there's something called the I can't remember exactly.
GDPR?
No, not GDPR. It is.
I just hear the acronym at work a lot, so I figured I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, no, they have a right to be forgotten. I think is what the European government calls it. And the right to be forgotten means that you can petition Google or any other search engine or web property and say, hey, I know that I committed this crime years ago, but I don't want you to show this criminal record result in my name. It's been 5 years. You should remove me. I can't remember exactly the logistics or the regulations around it. But the United States has nothing like that. Most countries in the world have nothing like that, right? The EU is unique in this way. And so as a result of that, lots and lots of people who either have done shady things or have had crappy things said about them online, or crappy articles written about them, they want to move that stuff down. And in order to do that, you generally need good stuff that can rank instead of it. And so yes, this is called reputation management SEO. It's a big industry. It's probably I'd be I'd be shocked if it's less than 5%, 10% of the industry. So there's a good...
Kanye needs a little reputation management SEO.
Oh my God. He needs a whole...
He needs a lot of things.
He needs a lot of things.
What's some things, basic things you can do if I have, my mom has a website, not true, but an example is
Sure.
my mom has a website about cooking, right? And she
Sure.
cooks all paleo meals, for example. What is something she can do on her website to rank higher in when people search for paleo recipes?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So a few things I would just generally advise anyone, and your fictional mom included, would be you want to do a little bit of keyword research, meaning you want to actually know what people are searching for and in what relative quantities. So do lots of people look for paleo recipes, or do they look for paleo diet or paleo food? Do they look for paleo steak? Do they look for paleo vegetables? Whatever it is, right? Paleo pasta. Sounds lovely. I don't know if it's possible.
You're a big pasta guy.
I am a big pasta guy. But that's why I'm not going paleo. But in order to do a great job with SEO, you have to know and understand what people are really searching for, right? Otherwise, you could be potentially optimizing your website for something that nobody's searching for, and then what's the point? So keyword research is one part of that. The Google AdWords tool is free, and it'll let you do some of that. Even just typing in Google and seeing the suggestions that come up as you start typing is really helpful. The ones at the top tend to be the ones that get more searches. If you perform a search like paleo recipes and you scroll all the way down to the bottom of Google's results, they have something called related searches. That'll help tell you also what people are looking for. And then if you want to, if you're professional and you want to pay, you can use a tool like Moz's Keyword Explorer, or a company called SEMrush, or a number of others to get professional keyword research tools that'll give you volume data. They'll say paleo recipes, 65,000 people searched for this last month.
Wow. And then, so once you understand, okay, so we know within the world of paleo recipes is the number one search keyword. What do we then do on our website to make sure that we rank in that? And when people search for that, do we create content that has the word paleo recipe in it? Like, what do you do then once you know the keyword?
So there's a few important places on any web page where you need to be putting your keyword, right? So the title tag is the biggest one, right? The title element, it's weird because it doesn't necessarily show on your web page. It shows in the browser tab above, right? So the title of the browser tab, but it's also what Google lists as the blue link text, right, in the results. And so it's very important that contain the keyword and that it's compelling to click on. So if you just said, paleo recipes for paleo stuff, paleo foods, that's a crap title, right? Like, I don't want to click that. You don't want to click that. You see that in the search results, you're out of there. You're clicking something else, even if you do everything else right. But if you say the 50 best paleo recipes that'll leave you,
for your summer body.
Yeah, for your summer body, or that'll make you think you're eating carbs, or whatever it is, right? And so that's the kind of thing, that's compelling, I want to click that. The next piece is the description. That's the text that appears below that title in Google. It, again, doesn't show on the website, doesn't show on the web page to visitors, but yeah, super important to think about that as well, and making that, essentially that's your ad copy, right? That's your, please click me because I'm interesting and I can provide you with value. And then the content itself needs to serve the visitor's need. Google has done a really, really good job of, getting very sophisticated. So it's no longer about, stuffing your keyword in there a certain number of times or anything like that. It is about serving your visitor. If people get to that page and they go, this is awesome, I love this. This really solved my problem. This gave me exactly what I needed. The first 5 of these recipes have me inspired. Bam, you're winning. That is SEO. It's not just SEO, but that will really, really help you.
And that's going to be tracked depending on how long the person or the visitor stays on the page, and their click-through rates and those sorts of things, or is it? Do you know the secret sauce from Google's perspective? So Google is a little more sophisticated than that. It's not just raw click-through rate. They use something called pogo sticking. Which is, sounds fun.
Sounds fun, yeah.
Sounds fun. So pogo sticking
sounds like my Friday night.
Oh, wow, you New York kids get wild. That's pretty awesome. That's old school. So pogo sticking is essentially this idea that, I'm sure you guys have done this, right? We've all done this. You search for something. I search for best, men's clothing stores NYC. And I get a list of results. I click on something. maybe I click on, I don't know, Thrillist. I get to a page and it's super annoying. It has a bunch of pop-ups and it has the multi-scroller where I have to click next, so it can serve me a bunch of ads. I just hate it. So 5 seconds in, 10 seconds in, I hit the back button. I go back to Google's results and I choose a different page from somebody else. I don't know, let's say it's Yelp, right? And I get to Yelp's results and maybe it loads up in the Yelp app for me or whatever. But then Google sees that once I get to Yelp, I stick around. I don't go back to Google. I'm not searching. I'm not changing my search to men's clothing, New York, or Like, clearly they have satisfied my query. And over the course of billions of searches every day, Google gets really good at identifying which sites and pages and which types of content and which formats of text and images and audio and video compels people to stay and to suggest that their problem has been solved, rather than, oh, you know what, that person looked like their problem was solved, but the next day they did the same search. I'm not sure they actually did get that solved. Maybe we should re-rank these results, right? And Google learns over time. So they're pretty sophisticated about that.
So if you build a website and you're trying to optimize it through SEO, I guess it's important, it sounds like, to not just worry about getting traffic to your website, but make sure you're solving the need for that traffic. Because I guess if you're a Chevy dealership and you try to optimize, even if you become the #1 search result for awesome luxury cars, like, you're going to end up failing because that's not what you
That's
are.
Exactly right. And so this was a big problem 5-10 years ago in the SEO world, where essentially people would use the rest of the thing. They'd optimize for keywords, they get lots of links to their website. Links are the other big important piece. The anchor text of links matters a lot. What the link actually says right in there. So there's a whole bunch of things, and people would essentially game those to get their results to the top. But then searchers weren't happy with the results, right? So the first result wouldn't help them, the second result wouldn't help them. They'd have to scroll down. Google hated that, and so they made this searcher satisfaction a bigger part of the algorithm. And today, it's not universally true. You still find some crappy results in there. But Google is really good. They are really good, and they're getting better all the time because they learn off of every query.
That's awesome. And so now I see YouTube and Instagram and these much more, obviously I search for everything on Google, but I also see YouTube, Instagram, other sort of social media platforms becoming really big places for search. If I want to go see what a brand's about, I'll go look for them on Instagram, or even more so on YouTube if I want to look at a certain way to do a certain workout, or how to tuck in a certain shirt or do a certain hairstyle.
Yeah, tie.
Exactly.
Sure.
I'm searching for those things on YouTube. When you move into the YouTube world, if you have it all, is it similar to Google in terms of SEO, or is it a totally different game?
There are some principles that are similar, right? So Google does use things like pogo sticking on YouTube. Obviously, Google owns YouTube, right? So interestingly, I just got some stats from a clickstream data company called JumpShot out in California. They collect millions of browser clicks every day, and they essentially showed me, sent me this data on how much people search on each of these platforms. So Instagram or YouTube, Facebook, Google, Bing, all this kind of stuff. And I think, Google is about 60%. And then there's another 20% that is Google Images, which is insane. Google Images gets an incredible amount of search volume. And then I think YouTube is number 3 with around 5-6%, and Bing is right behind them at around 4-5%. And then you get down into
Dog
Amazon.
pile.
No, their dog pile's invisible. They're
done.
They're gone. You know who's actually right at the end of that, very small but growing fast, is DuckDuckGo.
DuckDuck. I've never heard of DuckDuckGo.
So it's like this privacy-centric search engine run out of Philadelphia, and they've been creeping up there. It's really impressive to see. So they don't track anything that you do. They don't collect any data. They don't have any of the ad tech around storing personal information. If you're privacy conscious, DuckDuckGo's results are quite good, and they don't collect that stuff. So that's kind of cool to see. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, people who are like, hey, is Facebook taking over Google? I'm sort of like, Facebook is like 1/50th the size of Google's searches.
And it's apples to oranges, right? You're not looking for the sorts of things on Facebook you are on Google.
Yeah, so when we looked at the Facebook search queries, it's almost all people's names.
Yeah,
of course.
I'm betting big 2019 Ask Jeeves is coming back. But
I would love to see that. Yeah, crazy story. I was here in New York many years ago. This was 2007 for a search conference, and Ask Jeeves. I mean, this is how crazy the SEO world was at the time, search world in particular. They had like this party at this giant underground nightclub somewhere in Midtown, and they took Jeeves the butler, like a giant-sized Jeeves the butler, and froze him in carbonite live at the party. You know, like Star
real
Wars
human
style.
being?
No, like a fake live, you know, full size.
Okay.
Ask Jeeves, like wax model or something, and they put it in this box and like did the Star Wars like, freeze it in carbonite. And I just had this like, holy crap, they've got money. Like that's crazy.
What year was this?
I think it was 07 or 08. And then they were like, and now we're ask.com.
Oh my God. Hey, you're still talking about it 11 years
I guess so.
Yeah. My favorite, I just want to chime in with my favorite search engine story. And this is not that long ago. I mean, this is maybe 2013. I had a professor, Ancient, who wanted to show us something and opens up a web browser, and by default, because it's 2013 at this point, the URL bar, it's a Google search bar by default. So she types in google.com when she could have just Googled, and google.com comes up, and then she Google searches Yahoo and clicks the first link for Yahoo and then types in what she wanted to search. I literally just covered my mouth. Like, I thought this was a joke. Like, what?
Roundabout way to get what you need.
Three browsers.
One of the things that made a lot of Microsoft folks in Seattle like real sore for a long time was that the number one search by like 20x on MSN search and on Microsoft.com and then on Bing was Google.
Wow, that's like people walking into an Adidas store like, you got those Nikes? Any Nikes here? Like, anyone have Nikes?
Yeah, it's like you're not even asking for like the Air Jordans, right?
No,
like
right.
You're specifically saying, do you have your competitor's brand? Yeah. I would like to go there.
It's tough. Oh man. So one thing I was curious to know about Rand was the VC experience. I think VCs and venture capital, for those that don't know, it's a very sexy story. It's the college freshman in the hoodie walking into the big VC office, getting $30 million and opening an office with all his friends. And it sounds like those experiences are few and far between, and the reality of venture capital is nothing like what we see in the headlines on TechCrunch and other tech publications. So I'd love to hear from your experience, having been the CEO of a tech VC-backed company. What's it like? What's it like going through the funding process? Is it really what it seems like in The Social Network and those sorts of movies? And is it really as big of a payout as they make it seem for the VCs and the founders alike?
Yeah, so venture is an interesting capital class, and I go into some of the mechanics of it in the book. I try not to be too in-depth or boring about it, but basic story is that a venture capital firm, their goal is to beat the market, right? So they're trying to get to this, around between 8 and 12%, returns year over year, hopefully even higher than that. And in order to do that, they'll basically raise a fund, and there's some micro VCs who are very small who are raising fund sizes of $25 or $50 million. It's funny that that's micro, but then all the way up to these $1 billion funds that you see from people like SoftBank and
Greylock,
Sequoia, sure, right. So Greylock, right, and these funds then get what they call deployed, which means that a bunch of venture partners will go out, have meetings, coffee meetings usually with entrepreneurs, and get connected to folks who they think are doing interesting things, and then those entrepreneurs will come into their offices and pitch the partnership, and then the partnership will vote on whether they're going to make that investment, and if they do make that investment, what generally happens is that money then goes into the company's bank account, and they join the board of directors, and they have a bunch of rights that make sure that they get their capital back first in any kind of exit scenario.
So just a quick question: where does the money come from? So if I'm first round capital, I'm Sequoia, I have $1 billion in the bank.
Where did that come from?
Where did I get that $1 billion from?
Interesting places. Some of it comes from wealthy individuals. Some of it comes from pension funds. So, the New York Firefighters Pension Fund might say like, okay, look, we got about $7 billion that we have under management. We're going to put 5 of that into something really safe. We're going to put $1.5 billion into the public markets, maybe an index fund, and then we have this $500 million, and we're going to put that into riskier asset classes. And private equity is a riskier asset class. Venture capital is a riskier asset class. Real estate investment trusts might be something they do as well, right? So they're putting that money into those places, and then the venture capitalists, they have a sweet deal on that, which is basically that you get something called a carry. Carry is essentially an interest rate that is paid to you in lieu of a salary. So like let's say the 4 of us here, we all start a venture firm. We go and we raise $100 million, and our carry fee is 1%. So every year that we run that fund, we get to pay ourselves $1 million out of that $100 million just for managing it.
So regardless of results.
Regardless of results. So this is why when I say like, hey, don't worry too much about whether your venture capitalists are making their money back. They're always making their money. Like they are covered in every scenario because the carry takes very good care of them. And then they get additional incentives if the companies that they invest in perform well, and so they're going to invest. This is the odd part that I think a lot of media doesn't cover particularly well, which is that the model is to invest in, let's say 50 companies over the life of a fund, which might be 3 to 5 years on the short end, might be 7 to even 12 years on the long end, and maybe if it's 7 to 12 years, you might invest in more. And essentially out of those 50 companies, your expectation is that 2 to 4 of those companies will return a very large amount, 5 to 10 times your investment, maybe even more than that. Another 5 to 10 out of the 50 will make you a little bit of money. Maybe they'll return 1.5 to 3 times the amount of money that you put in. And the rest will do somewhere between break even and lose all the money that you put into them.
But so that creates this issue then where if you're a company that is 30% growth a year, which in any other market would be very
Awesome.
great and sustainable, right? But that means you're essentially the same as breaking even or losing money in their mind at that point, right?
Yeah, 30% is probably right on the border of where they're still interested. But Moz is a good example of this. So Moz grew 11%, maybe 11.5% from 2016 to 17. Did $47 million a year in revenue. About 10% of that was profit. So added $4.5 million to the balance sheet. Sounds pretty sweet. Not too
Sounds
bad.
great.
Yeah, I don't think any of us would be complaining too much about profitable company that's in the 40s and growing 10%. But for a venture capital, yeah, that sucks.
So was there ever what was the first hard conversation? I feel like as this was your first company, right? And there had to be a point where you walked in there and not only did we break even, we made money this year, and they're like, nah.
Okay, here's the weird part. My investors in particular have never been, I've actually been the one who's kind of, And the reason I think for that is because they're, so both Brad Feld from Foundry Group and Michelle Goldberg from Ignition are sort of, they're long-term thinkers. They don't worry too much about sort of the day-to-day and, a few years where it's growing slowly. But they know as well as I do that I think that they have this realistic expectation, like, okay, Moz for a long time, for 7-8 years sort of looked like it was going to be this crazy rocket ship. It was growing 100% year over year. So the first year I was CEO, we grew from about $800,000 to 1.4 million. And then the next year was 3.1, and the year after that was 5.7, then 11.4, 21.9, right? So it's just like, feels like, oh my God, this is taking off. This is going to go crazy. And then I think the year I stepped down, we had slowed that growth rate to 50% year over year, which is still quite good.
Yeah.
Right? Still
Not mad at that at all.
Yeah, not too bad. But then the last 4 years, growth has been as high as maybe 22, 23%, but the last couple it's been more like between 10 and 12. And that's where, you're kind of hitting this plateau, and not growing at that same rate. So yeah, there's a bunch of dynamics and systems inside the venture capital world that make it real weird. So I mentioned to you guys, right? Like, I had a nice salary at Moz. My salary's in the book, so it's like $200,000 a year, which is a great salary. That's really wonderful. But it's not, my stock is not sellable. As I was leaving the company over the last year, I sort of knew that I was going to be leaving, and so I talked to a bunch of other investors, like, hey, would you be interested in buying my stock? I couldn't sell it at any price. So on paper, technically I own 24% of this company that's worth whatever, $120 million, but in reality,
without a true exit, whether it's an IPO or an acquisition, you're never going to see a return on that stock.
That's right. Now, if this were a private company, we could pay dividends, right? We could say, hey, we're putting $5 million in the bank every year. Maybe we can pay out, $1 million of that, a couple million of that, right? So I know a lot of friends who are in the consulting world, for example, who are shocked when they find out that their take home is much larger than mine.
And that, I think that brings up an interesting point, because at least a lot of the things I hear is that the only way to get rich is to be an entrepreneur. is to remove yourself from the system, quote unquote, and not be an employee, and you have to work for yourself. This book, it seems to me, is telling a different story. It's saying the story that, yes, you can get extremely wealthy being an entrepreneur because you own whatever you're doing, and if it goes well, you get 100% of that. Under great circumstances, maybe a different percentage there. But another way to get rich is just work at a really great, stable company that pays you a lot of money. You can get stock at that company, etc. 24-year-old Ren, would you tell him to again go down that entrepreneur path with outside of the whole story, just not the whole story, but the journey, just from a straight financial perspective?
Sure.
Would you tell 24-year-old Ren to go the entrepreneur route, or maybe go try and get a job at McKinsey?
I mean, so there's no doubt, right? Like if I go and join a McKinsey, or if I went to work at Microsoft, or went to work at Amazon, well, Amazon in particular, right? If I joined Amazon in 2001 and gotten even a little bit of stock, that'd have been worth a lot. But you are almost definitely right. The odds are vastly in your favor if you go to a big company and make sort of mid-market, top of market. I have a friend who is a mid-level engineer, software engineer at Amazon, and he's taking home like twice what I am, right? Because Amazon's doing real well, and so his stock bonuses every year, great. And he just bought a giant house in Seattle, and it's awesome.
He's living,
and I'm not mad at all.
I'm thrilled for this guy.
He has so many LaCroix pans.
Oh no, he's awesome. I think he like bought his mom, who lives in he's from the Caribbean originally. He bought his mom a place, and
nice.
He's able to take care of family. It's awesome, right? It's really cool. But
right.
That's something, for example, my grandparents are in their 90s now. They need to move into like an assisted living facility, and we're struggling to come up with the money to like help them move into a place. Hopefully in Seattle, they live out here, and it's tough, man.
It's a tough road.
Yeah.
Moving away from the money of it all, because one thing you do talk about in this book that I found really inspiring from a leader is diversity in the workplace.
Yeah.
And you do touch on that in a really poignant and I think thoughtful way. And you really make the case for diversity. It's important to have a varied. You want to have different perspectives on a team, right? If everyone thinks the same way and acts the same way, we're not even talking about gender or ancestry or any background like that. Even just getting down to the mindset. You want to have a diversity of mindsets in the workplace.
Diversity of age, right? A diversity of background. Mm-hmm. Like, I grew up in a different place or a different circumstance or a different geography. Those things are hugely helpful.
Why is that important? As a CEO, why is it important? Why don't you want just 50 Rands working for you because you know how to talk to them and they'll think the same way you do?
Because then you will only build products for and sell well and market well to Rands. Mm. Yeah. And there's just not enough. Right? There's just not enough of those people. Like you, as an entrepreneur, you want to maximize your opportunity for distribution and for having a compelling product that lots of people can potentially use. Because marketing, this is the thing that kills so many startups. I think other than co-founder conflict, the next highest cause of startup death is basically we couldn't find enough customers, or we couldn't get enough customers profitably, right? It cost us too much to acquire a new customer. And so one of the things that you absolutely fundamentally need at your company to succeed is a profitable way to acquire new customers. And one of the best ways you can possibly do that is to cast a very wide net. And it is just impossible to cast a truly wide net with a very narrow, singular perspective and background, or, whatever, right? The three of us probably grew up in, middle class, upper middle class, white American families. We're all guys in our 20s and 30s. We probably can do a decent job of targeting people like us.
Yeah.
Easily.
Right?
But there's not that many of us. And we don't want,
But there's lots of us, but there's, 6 to 10 times more other kinds of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're missing out on what are things that we haven't thought about? There's a million things that we haven't thought about. Well, one of the examples I gave in the book, right, that I think resonates with a lot of folks, even who aren't interested in or attuned to classic kinds of diversity stuff, is like we had a couple folks who were an engineer who was dyslexic, and one a product guy who was colorblind. And just having them look at the products we were building,
UX type things.
Yeah, dyslexia is something like 8%, 9% of Americans, right, are affected in some way, right? A color blindness
higher
is
than that.
Yeah, is even higher
Especially
than that.
Especially men are way more likely.
Right.
I learned all this recently.
Yeah. So you're thinking like, oh, great, we made this awesome looking design. Yeah, it's awesome for the three of us, but what about all these other people that we're missing out on, right? And conversion rates drop when that happens. That engagement rates drop. That when engagement rates drop, your Google rankings drop, right? And so now you're not reaching as many people overall. So, all these kinds of diversity, to your point, ancestry, geography, age, ability, huge.
And it's a competitive advantage,
it
honestly.
Is.
I have in my day job, I manage a small team, and if I were to have 5 Brians on my team, I think it would be annoying. I think it would be
definitely.
No one wants to be a club. No one wants to join a club they're already a member of. But no, I think it would be annoying. I think we'd be limited. Like if everyone, it's a sales team, so if everyone was going to market and selling the product in the same exact way, we're going to miss out on a huge percentage of buyers who want to hear a different message in a different medium. So I see there's a million reasons that diversity is important. One of the things that I'm starting to learn now as I grow in my career is like it's a competitive advantage to have a very diverse crew working with you and for you. I think it's really important. Yeah.
I think I think there's obviously lots of great social equality and equity reasons to do that, but the statistics are also massively in your favor. If someone comes to you and they say, "Hey, I'll give you a 50% higher shot of your startup being successful," right? Like surviving past year 5, getting to profitability, all this kind of stuff. You'd be like, "Yeah, what do I have to do for that?" And their answer would be, "Get a woman co-founder." Right?
Really?
Like,
there's a 50% higher success rate?
Yeah. The success rates of gender diverse teams, or if you're a woman founder, right, get a guy co-founder, right? Because the success rates for gender diverse teams versus solo gender teams are insanely higher.
That makes sense though, right? Because like you want, kind of beating the same drum there, like you want that diverse experience. Like the way I see a problem is different than how someone who's way different than me will see the problem, and then you just have a broader decision-making engine when you have to like face problems. It makes sense, like just on the surface, it makes sense.
Well, and I think I suspect there's also some reverse causality in that, right? Like that people who do a good job, that have diverse networks, right, and that get along with people of lots of kinds, are also good at building and selling things to people of lots of kinds, right? So
easily.
Yeah.
So I want to use this gender diversity point to kind of as a bridge and move over to the things you're working on now.
Yeah.
Now that the book is out, now that that you're no longer at least day to day with Moz.
Yeah.
And I believe one of the projects you're working on actually has to do with women in tech or in startups.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's a project that is not yet launched, but it is, well, basically tied up in lots of legal reviews right now, and so I'm a pro bono client for these law firms.
So it's not getting solved too quick.
Yeah, they're a little slow to respond to me, but it's getting there slowly but steadily. So I'll give you the story that basically kicked this off, which was pretty to your point earlier, poignant. So a woman contacted me. She had been at a conference that I was speaking at, and this is about 18 months ago. And basically was out after the conference to dinner with a number of other speakers and attendees. And there was this one guy who was being a little weird to her, a little creepy. And, I'm sure you guys have all seen and experienced this kind of thing. He probably thought, oh, I'm hitting on her, she's cute, I'm interested, right? And she's like, I'm here for a professional conference. I'm trying to network. I'm trying to build my career. Mm-hmm. Like, this is weird and uncomfortable. So it gets weirder and more uncomfortable that they all sort of, get into the elevator at the hotel at the end. And unfortunately, everyone else has left the elevator, and then she's going up to her floor, and this guy's still in the elevator, and he sort of, tries to walk her to her room, then makes an attempt to kind of try to get into her room. They have a big argument about it. They end up going down to the lobby again and arguing, and she's trying to get away from him. At one point, I don't remember exactly how, but he grabbed her hair and she had to run. He was chasing her through the hotel. She hid in a broom closet and thankfully, got away. Right. So
sounds like this guy's a real loser.
Oh man, what a. So this. I actually.
When has that ever worked for any guy? Let me grab her hair and follow her in the elevator. I'm sure she'll want to hang out with me.
I can't really understand the mentality at all. So this is one of the reasons that it really, really got to me. There's a million reasons, but I had invited this guy, to speak at an event that we had put on. The organizers of this other event had seen him there, been impressed, and that's why he was there. Right? So I am the catalyst for why this asshole was at this event. Okay, so fast forward to the next day. And she goes and talks to the organizers of the event and says, hey, this thing happened last night. And they say, oh man, that's awful. We're so sorry. We will, what do you want to do? And she said, look, I've had bad experiences reporting stuff like this before, and I think it's adversely affected my career. I don't want to make a big deal about it. But I just want to let you know so that you can take action against this guy. And they're like, we got it. We'll go get the hotel tapes. We're on top of it. Well, she goes home. She thinks nothing of it. And 3 months later, she gets an email, just like a promotional email from the conference, that guy is their keynote for next year.
Mm. Oh.
Right. Not only did they not take action, they're promoting this guy, right? So she sent me an email about it. I had a phone call with her. I was just infuriated, and then I called the conference, right? I called these guys from the conference. I was like, "Hey, what's up? Guess what I know?" Mm-hmm. And I was basically like, you're going to take action here, or I'm going to burn your shit to the ground publicly, mm-hmm. right? Because that's one of the things that I have the privilege to do. I have a big following. If I published a blog post that is Conference X about, invites so and so, to keynote after.
Good luck showing up on Google search results after this one.
Yes,
talk about reputation management, SEO.
That is exactly right. And this is one of the things, right? Like inside that industry, I'm extremely well followed, and so sure. that would achieve a lot of stuff. So anyway, had a conversation with them. And they did the right thing, right? They sent her an apology. They uninvited this guy, all that kind of stuff. But, then I look and there's he's speaking at other conferences and events, right? And he's sort of ancillary to our industry. He's really in another one, but he's got a career. He's speaking in those
and
places.
Ultimately, he's just almost like a metaphor for all of the hymns out there.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Well, so I start telling this story to some people. Mm-hmm. And holy shit, I tell this story to 2 or 3 women. I hear 5 more stories about like this, more and more stories. I mean, I told this story on stage in a brief format at MozCon, right? Before we're opening up, right? To try and set the tone of hey, this shit is unacceptable and we're going to be taking action and I'm going to be taking action against this. And I had a woman come up to me afterwards and she was like, thank you so much for bringing that up. I actually, I was raped at a conference 2 years ago, and like I didn't involve the organizers. I went to the police, and like now it is a police matter, and like it's, you know, going through the process. But this is, holy shit, my career was built going to events. How would I get all these connections to, you know, investors and to my market? And I never had to think twice about this stuff. You know, I'm
right
like,
now
okay.
For women, it's like they have to go into it like nervous that something bad like this could happen.
Yeah, it's sort of like, okay, let me do the calculus. You know, it's not just the cost of flying to city X and paying for the hotel. It's sort of like, well, what's it going to be like for me?
Yeah.
Right? What kind of experience am I going to have? And, you know, and it sucks too because, you know, it happens. You know, it happens when you're young in your career oftentimes, and so like it just, you know, when you wonder, oh well, why aren't there more women in our field, or, you know, more prominent women in our field, or more founders, or more speakers, or whatever it is. Well, there's no doubt that this is contributing to that. So the project that I'm working on is basically a coalition of a bunch of events that can report to a shared spreadsheet and say like, hey, we received a report about X, and we, you know, did we investigate? Yes or no? Did we take action? Yes or no? So that at least you can go in there and be like, oh, look, you know, I can see that whatever, in November of 2017, you know, Rand Fishkin was reported, they investigated, they did or did not take action, right?
So it's like the family watchdog of conferences.
Yeah.
And will this be public? Could I go in there and see who's been reported?
No, only conference organizers would be able to, only the conference organizers who are basically a part of this network, this you know, project certification process would be able to then go in and see that. So it is non-public. But there's a bunch of legal stuff to work through around that. What exactly can and can't the spreadsheet say? You know, what's defensible? Who's on the hook for it? That kind of thing.
Got it. And is that SparkToro? Or that's a separate project? Okay.
Totally separate, not-for-profit project that is incorporated separately.
Got it. Okay, so this is a separate project. That's awesome. That sounds like a really helpful tool for both the conference organizers to know what's happening, and then for women who want to attend these events and like don't want to be like creeped out to go to them. I think it'll be amazing.
I mean, my hope, one of the, I think, good things that I've seen about this is that many of the stories that I've heard from women, specifically in the industry that I operate in, have been about the same person over and over. Not one person, but, you know, a handful, 3, 4, 5 people. And it's sort of like, gosh, these same names come up time and again. So I think, thankfully, it's not that, you know, every guy out there is doing this. I think that there's a few bad eggs that are responsible for a majority of the really shitty.
Yeah, and they get away with it a few times, right? And then they stop thinking it's something wrong.
Well, there's one guy, I won't say who it is, but there's one guy in our field who's been banned from like 4 conferences. But there's 40 more he can go to, right? And it's not like those 4 conference organizers call up all the other ones and go, hey, you got to watch out for this dude, right?
Right, now, got it. So this can kind of act as that sort of shared space for that.
Exactly.
Got it. Awesome. Well, definitely we'll keep track of that. And when and if it's out, let us know. We'd love to share with our peeps.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that.
And now, so SparkToro, now that's a separate business that you're currly running?
Yeah, that's my new startup.
What's that one about? Would you mind giving us the elevator on that?
Yeah, so I kept seeing this problem, especially when I was talking to companies that don't get a lot of search volume for what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if we decide to start a yoga studio, there's lots and lots of searches for yoga studios in New York, right? And so we can get a lot of traffic by ranking for that and that kind of thing. But let's say we start a whole new kind of exercise program that no one's ever heard of.
So like CrossFit 10 years ago or something like that, right? You're trying to explain to people.
Exactly. No one's heard of it. Like, how do we build demand for that thing, right? And one of the ways that people do this, and I think marketers do, which is very smart, is they try and figure out who their audience is, and then they try and figure out what their audience pays attention to. You know, what publications do they read? What do they watch on television? What podcasts do they listen to? What YouTube channels do they subscribe to? Which people they follow on Instagram? Who do they follow on Twitter? Who are they connected to on LinkedIn? What blogs do they read? You know, all the way down this list of influential publications and people. And that process is completely manual, right? Like, you know, if you guys, for example, were to go, okay, well, you know, we've got the Gramercy Reading Club, and like, who's the right audience, and who could we get to cover what we're doing and mention and amplify this? you're going to Google, you're doing a bunch of searches, maybe you look up a few competitors and you try and figure out, who are they reaching, where are they being amplified.
Definitely some guesswork in there, I imagine.
Totally, tons of guesswork. SparkToro is trying to solve that problem, right? So you plug in and say, hey, my audience is X, right? And you could do that a bunch of ways. You could say that, hey, I want to reach interior decorators on the West Coast of the United States. Or you could say, I want to reach people who are interested in Dungeons and Dragons, or I want to reach, people who are interested in men's fashion. And then
Both of those last ones are Steve.
Awesome.
It's actually Dungeons and Dragons themed fashion.
Dungeons and Dragons themed fashion. That sounds fascinating. I look forward to that. Right. But so you could basically plug those sorts of things in, or you could say like, my audience is really hard to describe, but I know that this person on Instagram is followed by a lot of them. So find me more people who are followed by people who are similar to this person's audience or this account's audience.
And I mean, and there's definitely a market for that. Even just like you said, in us, we talk about it all the time when we talk about, okay, who are the Gramercy Reading Club listeners? And and sometimes it's easier to describe like, well, they also like this.
Yes.
It's like,
yeah. So, the Amazon process, people who like X also like. Right. But figuring that out is a pain in the butt. Like you guys might know, 4 or 5, you might be able to name off the top of your head 4 or 5 because you talked to a bunch of your listeners and you had experience and that sort of thing. But running a large scale survey to them is costly and time consuming and expensive. And trying to, manually go dig through an internet stock 1,000 people and then do the Venn diagram of like, okay, what's the overlap of who they all follow? That stuff is ridiculous. Yeah. Software should solve that.
Yeah, and even like with the amount of metadata there is, like it's almost like software knows. We could talk to our listeners in person, but the software almost knows what they like more than they do, right? Like like there's tons of algorithms I'm sure that can kind of solve for that, right? If you ask them what they like, they could list the 5 things that come to mind, but not all the other accounts they follow on Instagram and all the YouTube videos that they're not thinking about.
Yep. And so what's kind of cool is that there's enough public data via, crawling the web, crawling the blogosphere, crawling YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and all these places to be able to build up kind of like pollsters do for elections, right? Where they essentially will go and talk to or survey, 1,100 people in Ohio, and from those 1,100 people, then you can extrapolate how the whole state is going to vote within 2 or 3 points, percentage points. Obviously, the last election being off by 1 or 2 percentage points was a big deal, but that kind of level of accuracy. And marketers, we don't have anything like that, right? So I think that's exactly what SparkToro is trying to build is. Be able to crawl all of that data and then provide that to you and say like, okay, you're trying to reach interior decorators. We have 4,000 interior decorators on the West Coast. In our database, we don't have any personal information about them, right? We just have that entity data about what they follow and what they pay attention to. And so now we can tell you, if you're looking for blogs that they regularly read, 220 of those 4,000 read or have shared content from blog X in the last 6 months. Awesome. That's where I want to be.
So you're approaching this from like an SEO kind of lens, but it sounds like there's also like a huge like ad process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here, right? Like
I mean,
targeted
I think
ads kind of.
this is what we're hoping to do is expose the sources, channels, people's publications, not necessarily to then be prescriptive about how the marketer might go and reach those people. So advertising could absolutely be one. You could do, manual kinds of outreach. Maybe you're trying to get a guest publication, guest editorial contribution. Maybe you just want to do some commenting. Maybe you want to start up a conversation on Twitter with that person. Whatever it is, we want to just enable you to find the right places to do that.
Awesome.
That sounds like an awesome project.
Yeah, it's gonna be very cool, but I think it's probably gonna be 6 to 9 months of development before it's ready.
Awesome. Well, if you need some beta testers, the GRC boys are happy to give it a run, man. Well, I think we got to wrap this one up. My car is illegally parked near my apartment, and
awesome.
The street sweeper's coming at 11:30. So, can you tell the people where if they want to follow you and keep up with you, where they can watch Rand Fishkin's moves and keep up with you and your projects? What's the best place to find you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm most active on Twitter at RandFish. You can also find me on SparkToro.com. And we've got a blog there. And if you want to follow for updates, that's a great place to do it.
Cool.
Yeah,
All right, man, perfect.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And Yeah, definitely excited to let the people know about the book. So appreciate it, Rand. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Thanks.